Hello, everyone, and welcome. I see a few of you starting to join the call, which is great to see. I was convinced when I saw the sun out earlier that it might just be myself on this call. So I'm delighted that so many of you are starting to join us. I am Emily McKenzie, and I'm the head of marketing here at Codex. And I'm very excited to be joined today by Brian Crinion from Spectrum Optimise and Greg Herbert from Spectrum Mental Health. So as those of you in the audience will know, these two panelists are here with me today to share their professional wisdom on how you can mind your well-being while working remotely, a subject which is obviously very topical at the moment, with rumors of a third lockdown looming in Ireland. So before we get further into it, I'm going to pass you over to our CEO, Patrick Murphy, who is going to properly introduce our two panelists to the group.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks to everyone to giving up the time for this talk. I suppose to me it's a very apt timing of just having this talk. We're nearly a year into lockdown in the next 2 weeks, so I think in particular it's been a very hard last few weeks to everyone. I don't know if it's the weather or just the fact that it's this lockdown fatigue, which I'm hearing referenced a lot, but I think the timing of the talk is well quite apt. So I suppose really looking forward to see what our panelists from Spectrum Optimise and Spectrum Health have to say. So we have Brian Crinion, qualified physiotherapist and founder of Spectrum Optimise, who specialise in workplace ergonomics, and he'll answer questions on the physical side of things, I suppose. And we've Greg Herbert, a clinical psychologist and director of Spectrum Mental Health. He has extensive experience in developing, providing training, consultation and guidance on mental health topics and strategy, and he'll answer questions on the mental health side of things. So I'll let you take it away there, Emily, but looking forward to hearing what we have to say today.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Patrick. So those of you who are curious about what we will be covering today, time permitting, we're going to look at answering the following questions. So creating better work-life balance, scheduling breaks throughout the day, managing anxiety, avoiding neck pain, and for all you parents out there, managing homeschooling and a full-time job, easy ergonomic fixes, and what the future of work looks like. So a few housekeeping updates. We're going to be starting with a quick discussion with our panelists, and we will be holding a short Q&A at the end of our talk. But please, obviously, if any questions come up during our discussion, feel free to use either the chat function at the bottom of your screen or the Q&A, and I'll make sure that Brian or Greg answer your questions. As you may have heard as well, we've got a number of great prizes available for all of you attendees. So we have a home office pack, a one-on-one ergonomic assessment, and a company ergonomic webinar. So there'll be details shared throughout our chat on how you can win these prizes. So make sure you stay tuned, and a word of wisdom, make sure you have your keyboard close because you might need some fast fingers to win the prizes. So before we jump into our chat, I was going to say on behalf of Greg, Brian, and myself, we'd love a bit of a steer in terms of what we should be focusing on today. So we'd love to hear from all of you in the audience in terms of what has been the biggest challenge you've faced while working remotely in 2021. So I've got a quick poll, which I'm going to be launching right now. And it would be great if a few of you just take a quick minute to answer that. So while we are waiting, I'll share the results when they come in, but while we are waiting for the group to answer, I have a quick question, I suppose, for the both of you, Greg and Brian. I imagine COVID-19 has obviously had an effect on both of your businesses, and I'd love to know, I suppose, what the impacts of remote working have been from both a physical standpoint as well as a mental health standpoint.
So I think from a mental health standpoint, obviously this has been hard, and this has been really hard. I certainly don't want to be kind of unnecessarily doom and gloom about this, because there are of course things that people have been engaging with that have been helpful. Things like the kind of commute going away, that's been a potentially very positive thing for a lot of people. And having said that, you know, there's no point in kind of sugarcoating things either. I think that the main thing that's kind of coming up around from a mental health point of view is that the sense of kind of connection is hard to maintain specifically, and then in terms of just kind of monotony and kind of trying to set up a structure that works, and having a routine without being kind of overly rigid. Those are kind of some of the things that I think have come up a fair bit, in addition to just kind of, sense of kind of anxiety, sometimes depression, those kinds of bits and pieces.
Great. And Brian, what about on your side? Any ergonomic issues, I suppose, you're seeing crop up?
Yeah. From the physical side of things, it's kind of a good crossover in that as well, where people sometimes struggle to set up what we would call a designated work area. So one of the key things that we look for in a home office is a place that you can actually set up as your own. Because if you can't set it up, or you don't have a space that you work in regularly, then it's really difficult then to get what we call your ergonomics right, but more importantly, your body posture right. So if you're constantly going from the couch to the kitchen table, to the dining room table, and then working in the bedroom, realistically, it's going to be your body posture that actually suffers, and it's going to be the neck or the shoulders or the back that actually starts to give out. And that's what we've seen for people working from home, that if they had any kind of issues already, it would be exacerbated by the kind of the changes and the adaptations they'd have to make. And then if they didn't have anything before, then, well, give it a bit of time and things sometimes then start to develop. So that's kind of what we see. But we don't like either of those things, and it is correctable. It's just taking the right steps then to make sure that we do it.
Alrighty, so we've got some answers into our poll. So it looks like we actually have a tie. The top two are increased feelings of burnout, feeling isolated from colleagues for the tie, and then closely behind that was establishing work-life balance. And I actually see that someone has put their hand up in the group. Have we got a question to ask? Rachel, is it? If you want to put up the question in the chat or in the Q&A, we can come back to it later. Okay, so I think that's very interesting, obviously. So just to touch on the feelings of burnout and even work-life balance, Greg, this question's for you. You know, I've heard a number of complaints where people feel as though they're waking up earlier, or maybe working later than they did when they were in the office. And I think it is really hard for lots of us when you don't have that physical separation between work and home, and it all blurs when your laptop's in the other room or it's in the same room as you. So for anyone who might be struggling with either burnout or work-life balance, do you have any tips?
Sure. I think one of the things, so whenever I think about kind of tips around mental health, I think that it's always really important to kind of recognize context. Not everything is going to work for every person, because people have their own unique circumstances. Having said that, there's some overall principles that I think are probably useful for most people. So some of those would be recognizing the fact that our anchor structures and routine have kind of been taken away. So previously you had different textures to different parts of your day. So sometimes it would be kind of, you'd wake up and you'd have breakfast, you get your shower, you do all the things that you do, then you'd leave the house, you'd have your commute, you'd get to work, you'd start working, and parts of the day felt different. What we're increasingly finding, and have found over, as Patrick was saying, the last year really, is that it's really hard to texture different parts of your day in different ways. And so it just becomes this one long thing, where you don't really feel any different from one end of it to the other. And then that can impact kind of work-life balance. And so one of the things to kind of be mindful of in that is, what can you do to make different parts of your day feel different? And some of it can be actually potentially quite basic, even down to things like, do you change clothes when you're working versus when you're not? To just give yourself that additional, the more cues you can give yourself to this is work and this is not work, the better. So things like change of clothes, things like creating a kind of a space where, your commute would have been maybe going for a walk, listening to a podcast, listening to music, those kinds of things. And also, and Brian, you'll probably kind of have some thoughts on this as well, I'm sure, but that kind of workspace idea, that if at all possible, and everyone's in a different circumstance, but if at all possible, if you can have ideally a separate area completely, where that's where work lives and that's where work is. If that's not possible, changing your context, and so even down to kind of making things look different, hiding your laptop so you're not actually seeing it, because if you see it, you're gonna, I'll just log on for a second, and then suddenly your light goes green and someone's gonna ask you a question and you're right back into the flow of it. So those are some of the bits that I would kind of be highlighting in that are just kind of general principles to to be considering.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was actually saying to a colleague the other day, at the start of the pandemic, I think I was so used to my 30 to 45-minute commute into work. The novelty of waking up a little bit later, sleeping in, was there, but I felt worse for it. So one of the best things I did was just making sure that I'm scheduling in at least 30 minutes, just get outside before my workday starts, and to have more of that separation from my workday, which was hugely beneficial.
Can I ask, Greg, do you find we are getting better at this then as the lockdown goes on, as it prolongs? Or, you know, are you seeing more evidence that we're getting better at this? I mean, even myself, as in trying to put some more structure, routine about just how I get up, the time I get up, you know, my morning routine, getting back to that. Are you finding that the majority of people are getting better at it?
Mm-hmm. A huge amount of this is actually it's variable. People can find rhythms that work for them, and that rhythm works for a while, and then potentially it may stop working for a variety of reasons. The thing that we see most frequently is the longer a specific lockdown goes on, it seems like the more kind of stuck people feel. So if you think about kind of your experiences of the different lockdowns at different points, as they kind of ease, maybe during the summer, there was a kind of a sense of kind of more flexibility, you know, things are kind of a bit more normal, for want of a better phrase, and you kind of go back into a lockdown, you kind of find a rhythm. So what we find is that people at different points, it's harder for different people. And so the thing that the kind of the key, the tipping point, is not actually finding your exact rhythm and what exactly works for you. It's actually the level of flexibility that you approach things with, that you're able to have enough flexibility to say, this isn't working, I need to do something else, but also enough rigidity to actually say, right, well, let's kind of stick with this. And that honestly has been fairly variable. We have seen since Christmas that there has been an increase in kind of difficulty maintaining that. So people are struggling more now, from what we can see, than they were previously.
And I've got a question that's just come in from one of our attendees, who's asking, video meetings obviously tend to be more of a regular occurrence in our new working reality. Any tips you can share on video call fatigue?
Well, so I can speak about this from the kind of the psychological piece, and then maybe throw it across to yourself, Brian, from the kind of the how do you actually sit in one place for hours at a time and not destroy yourself. From a psychological perspective, I think it's kind of the main thing to do is to try, if at all possible, and I know this is not always possible, try to build in gaps. If you can, back-to-back stuff is going to happen, but if you can, one of the things about video meetings is you don't have a shared social space in the same way that you previously would have. So it's an awful lot more work, and it can feel a lot more false. There's a lot more distance, so you're not looking at the same thing. You can't tell where someone is looking. You can't really read that much about how someone else is doing, and so it's hard to kind of feel that connection. And so what I would encourage to do is build in breaks if at all possible, and then if it does feel like it's kind of you are getting an awful lot of kind of fatigue, and it's just an awful lot of work, consider, does this, and this goes back to pre-COVID, does this have to be a meeting? Does this have to be a video call? Can we do this over email? Can we do it over phone? Even changing something to phone and like just getting up and like going outside and walking and doing it that way. Do you have to see each other? Do you have to be sharing screens? That kind of stuff. Those are some of the things that I would encourage to consider, and then just have a bit of time, maybe at the beginning and the end, just to kind of have a quick chat and kind of, how are you? Things are going to get done slower during this time. It's just a fact. So we can pretend that they don't and just end up driving ourselves into the ground, or we can just accept that fact and kind of say, look, we're not going to be at 100%, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point you made, Greg, on the scheduled breaks piece. Brian, from an ergonomic standpoint, should we be scheduling breaks throughout the day in terms of the time that we're spending looking at our screen? I found over the past year, I'm getting closer and closer and closer to my screen because there's been so much screen time. I think it's impacting my vision. But any thoughts on that, obviously from an ergonomics standpoint?
Yeah, there's two different types of breaks when you look at it like this. And the one that's really beneficial, particularly with back-to-back video calls, is micro breaks. So if you can actually not take 30 minutes for a video call or not take the full 60 minutes for a video call, and if you take, 55 minutes or 56 minutes, and I know how strange that sounds, but it gives you that little bit of a window then to be able to go and get a drink of water, or be able to go down to the bathroom, or just even just stand up and move. And it's so funny, but that is certainly something that we see that flags to us a lot, is back to back to back calls. Because in an office environment, you'd be getting up and moving to different meeting rooms, or you'd be getting up and going to someone else's desk, and we just don't have that anymore. So you could quite literally be sitting for 4 or 5 hours without moving. So that is definitely one thing. So the 55-minute meetings are brilliant. They work really well. The other thing is that you do actually have to try and put blocks into your actual work calendar. So people a lot of times don't see breaks and their work as the same thing. They see breaks as the deterrent for work. So they see that breaks actually inhibit productivity, and that is not true. It's actually the other way around, where actually breaks encourage productivity and they help keep us more refreshed and actually stop our body structures from overloading. And that's really, really important. It's like when you're in the gym and you do too many reps in a row without taking a break. That's essentially what you're doing to your body when you're sitting kind of 2, 3, 4 hours in a row. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that you can have what's called a sneaky kind of what I would say posture change. And sometimes that is standing up, which is a great idea, but other times it's actually reclining in your chair. So I am not saying work reclined in your chair. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm saying actually, if you know how to use your chair, and if you have a chair that has that functionality, you unlock it and you can actually lean back in your chair. And that actually has a decompression effect on your spine. And it's really good, and it does help. Obviously, it's a band-aid, but it really does have a very positive effect, especially if you're kind of stuck. And that's how it kind of works. Yeah.
Can I ask, Brian, are you finding, and Greg, are you finding that companies are making decisions to give staff that blocks of break, like be it, from 12 to 2, companies are starting to say, is in it, like, in other words, making a policy to give breaks throughout the company for meetings in that regard, like to make a conscious decision that it's not productive?
Yeah, we see that now. We say protected break times and protected lunch times, which I've encouraged for a long time, and not letting meetings be called before a certain time in the morning or a certain time in the afternoon, and really just doing that. And it works really well in terms of, like Greg said, do you need a meeting for this? Because if you only have 4 hours of allocated to meetings, then it makes you think twice. If you've got 8 hours allocated to meetings, you go, sure, we'll just throw that in there. So it's a different mentality, and it works really well in terms of just the structure of your organization of your day. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that just to kind of be mindful of that is that sometimes it's kind of tricky to maintain that, because you actually have to be quite ruthless at times. And like, this is the amount of time we have for this, and then just kind of chopping it there, which can be uncomfortable. And so it's not always kind of necessarily just, look, we chop it here and that's it. Like there can be discomfort around that. And I think just recognizing that and knowing that sometimes making the right choice for you and for others in terms of your well-being, the comfortable choice and the right choice are not necessarily always the same thing. And I think that probably goes for mental health as well as kind of physical pieces.
So we have a few more questions that are coming in, which is great to see. So Robbie's asking here something else on virtual calls. So the message is, most of today's interactions through virtual calls are task-driven. Calls are made to colleagues with a particular focus. Do you have any tips from experience on how others have been able to introduce personality and interaction to such calls? Any thoughts there, either of you?
I think that it's hard to do, but in actual fact, the first step is to actually specifically identify that the concept of what we call it social capital is really important to getting work done, because we're not robots. And if you think about any organization, how that organization gets stuff done, there's the kind of the workflow policies and flow charts and all that kind of stuff. But then there's the actual kind of, oh, well, I know Jim and Jim does this, and if I just have a quick chat with Jim, we can probably sort that out really quickly. And it's those kinds of bits that kind of get a bit missed, especially when you look at your diary and it's kind of back-to-back meetings and you don't have space for that. And so what we've been encouraging companies and individuals to do is to actually specifically identify that as a valuable piece to be able to connect and engage. And even if it's carving off 5 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to just kind of see how someone is, I think that's really important. And honestly, lean into the awkwardness of it. It's going to be awkward to just kind of say, hey, how are you doing? You can pretend that it's not as much as you want. But this is an awkward situation, and it's much easier if we all just kind of own that and then kind of move through in that way.
Yeah, and positioning plays a big part in your mindset. So if you can imagine, if you're talking into a meeting and you start the meeting sitting perched on the edge of your chair, leaning into your camera, that's a completely different kind of, I'd say, impact on your physicality, but also on your mentality. So if you're leaning back with your hands behind your head, you're not going to talk the same. You're not going to have the same tone in your voice if you're standing, if you're walking. So actually using even the first 2 or 3 minutes, the chat part of the meeting, to change positions and change postures is a great idea, because it basically mirrors very nicely with each other. So if you're walking and chatting, that's great. If you're sitting down, kind of, with the head in the laptop, that's not the same chat. So it's kind of nice, but it has 2 very positive effects, physically and from the other mentality point of view, which is great.
Perfect. Okay, and just a quick one. I've been getting a few messages on my sound. Can you hear me okay? Or am I having the fatal Zoom technical issues over here?
I was going to say the cat emoji thing as well would work quite well.
Okay, then we'll press on. So a few more questions we might touch on later, but Paul and Dave have asked a similar question. So surrounding, Brian, homeworking, do you think it's kind of here to stay post-COVID? And how has this been kind of impacting your business? Are we seeing more companies offering ergonomic services in this environment?
Very much so. For me, homeworking has been creeping into the modern workspace for quite some time, with companies a little bit, I would say, cagey about introducing it, just because of all the kind of logistics and stuff that goes with it. But now that it's kind of, I won't say forced on us, but now that we had to do it, now it's going to be the norm. So I really do believe that we won't see people in an office really on Mondays and Fridays anymore. So you'll see people kind of working from home, kind of maybe Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, and then working from home on a Monday, and then they'll be in the office then from Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So it would be a completely different shape to our lives if that was something that we would actually be able to incorporate. And obviously it doesn't have to work like that, but a lot of people do consider they want to go back to the office, but there's not really many people saying I want to go back to the office 5 days a week for full hours. And that's something now that we have to kind of embrace, I think, and work towards. And that's what companies are doing.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got a few more questions that we can answer, but I thought it might be a good time for our first prize. So how this is going to work, we've got a one-on-one ergonomic assessment that we're offering with Spectrum Optimise. So it's very simple. I'm going to be putting up a question into the chat right now, and the first correct answer will be our winner. So get your keyboards ready. Alrighty, so while we're waiting for the answers to come in, or for our attendees to do some frantic Googling, Greg and Brian, I have a quick question for the both of you. So we kind of touched on it when we were talking about the work-life balance piece and burnout, and the need to create these habits. But how do you actually adhere to these habits so they stick?
Yeah, I think that's always it's kind of, we always have all these plans, and then we stick to them maybe for a week or two, and then suddenly they fall away. I mean, if you think about kind of even things like gyms are packed at the beginning of January, and then come February suddenly they're not so busy anymore, because it's hard to make change. We are designed to maintain habits and maintain things that we're already doing, and we're resistant to change. We find a way that works, and then we kind of just try to stick to that. So the one of the key things around that is just to kind of have some very kind of basic ideas or principles in mind whenever you're considering making a change. One of the 2 drivers for any behavior in any organism pretty much ever has always been, you're either trying to get something or trying to get away from something, or a combination of the 2, right? So basically every piece of behavior you can think of is driven by one or both those ideas. And so knowing that, then considering, well, what is it that you're doing at the moment? What is that currently getting you? And the default response to that is always, it's not getting me anything. Right? I mean, I should just stop. I should do these things, but that's not actually true, because if that was true, you wouldn't be doing it. So there is something about what you're currently doing or not doing that is kind of what we would call reinforcing to you. So the first thing to do is to actually consider, what is it about my current situation that's keeping me in this, and what am I getting out of that? And is there potentially a different way to get at that idea that would be kind of more in line with who I want to be, or the behaviors that I want to engage with? So kind of a brief example of that would be, people saying, oh, I'm going to get up at 6 o'clock every day and go for a run, when they don't do that at the moment. And so you go, so okay, so what would you lose if you were to try to do that? And they say nothing. Well, you'd lose some sleep. Well, I go to sleep earlier. Okay, so why aren't you going to sleep earlier now? Well, I like to watch a bit of Netflix. Okay, so is that okay to be gone? Well, yeah, but if you don't think about kind of replacing that, or how you're actually going to frame that, then you'll potentially try to do something that potentially is maybe not all that pleasant, but is good for you. And then your mind just goes, yeah, this isn't hitting the stuff that I need it to hit. But it doesn't tell you that. It just goes, yeah, just stay in bed, or just order the food that's maybe not so great for you, or do these things, and it'll shortcut you out of that entire situation. So I guess the main thing to think about is, what is it that you're getting from your current setup, and how do you get at that in a way that is consistent with these other things that you want to start doing?
I ask, Greg, is it a challenge at the moment? Is that because there's so many challenges just in general?
Yeah.
People have to set lower expectations that they normally would. Is that a problem at the moment?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think that if people were to ask me kind of, like kind of what's the most important thing at the moment, the most important thing at the moment by far is compassion, self-compassion, and compassion for others. If you don't have that, you're going to end up driving yourself into the ground, because you don't have space for less than perfect or anything else. And so that's the main thing. And understand that your expectation may be in one place, and that's okay. Like, that's not a bad thing. And things are hard right now, like for like homeschooling and things like that. Like, there are some stuff that's just not really on the table right now. So I wouldn't suggest that anyone is kind of, when lockdown first came, everyone was, oh, well, I'm going to learn a new language, I'm going to learn a new instrument, I'm going to do all these things. I wouldn't recommend you doing that during a time when there's a lot of pressures on you, which is right now. And so this is about what works, what's acceptable, and what would I like to start changing. And if I am not perfect on that, can I have some self-compassion and know, like, this is hard, and accept that, and know that that's okay, even if we don't always feel like it is.
People do that with their posture as well, by the way. They set these incredible expectations for themselves, try and force themselves into unnatural and overly corrected positions, which ultimately then can lead to one of the great motivators, which is pain. So you'll only change if your neck starts to hurt you, your back starts to hurt you, your shoulders starts to hurt you. And unfortunately, that's kind of when the horse is bolted a little bit sometimes. So it's about not getting to that, and like that, setting realistic expectations for your workstation setup and your workstation posture. And it's kind of nice. It's good to mirror those.
Yeah.
I always say to you, Brian, the best thing for my posture is being on a video call with you, because I'm always so aware not to be slouching my shoulders so much. So
I have that effect sometimes.
Okay, we have a few more questions coming in, so if you just don't mind answering them. Do we have any tips for balancing breaks with feeding procrastination? So I'm assuming that's taking lunch breaks and snack breaks and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, because a break can quickly become procrastination, or you're going to sneak up on you. The thing that I would always encourage people to do, and the thing that is one of the things that is linked to kind of positive mental health, is engagement with the present moment. It doesn't mean that you have to be, a complete kind of mindful guru all the time and just always in the moment, but taking a step, like taking random points during the day and asking yourself, what am I right now, and what is this for? and engaging with that, and then committing to a kind of a purposeful behavior one way or the other. Not necessarily deciding what you think you feel, because you don't really get to decide that, certainly not in the moment. Because if you did, honestly, my job would look very different. If someone was to come in and say, I'm feeling anxious, my entire response would be, well, don't feel anxious, stop feeling anxious. And they would go, that's great. But it doesn't work like that, because if it did, that's what we would all do. And so with procrastination and breaks, I would just check in with yourself. What is this for? What am I doing right now? And if the answer comes back, here's what I'm pursuing, like here's what I'm trying to move towards, then that can, not always, but that can indicate, okay, you're kind of, there's a growth, or kind of a self-support piece going to that. If it's, I'm doing this so I don't have to think about that, or I don't have to do this other thing. If it's a kind of an avoidant posture where you're trying to not, like you're doing this so that you're not doing something else, that's probably more linked to procrastination. And so just even checking in that, and then making a conscious choice and recognizing this is what I choose right now, and engaging with it in that way, as opposed to, oh, I'm so bad, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. Okay, and absolutely, like that's gonna come into your head. And what are you choosing right now? Not what are you choosing up here, but what are you choosing to do in any given moment?
Great. Okay, so I see no one's come back to our prize question. So I don't know if everyone's had a chance to see that yet. But will we just answer the question, maybe, Brian, and we'll ask another question at the end instead?
And so it was where?
Yes, it was Eyeline. Where should your Eyeline be with your computer?
Yeah, so this is always a good question for debate, because we as human beings are designed a certain way when it comes to our eyes, where there's a distinction between what's called our eye level and our eye line. All right. So when your eyes are level, let's say the top toolbar of your screen. So you see the very top of your screen, and your eyes are level with this part, it means your eye line is about a third down the page. So technically speaking, it should be, your eye line should be a third down the page, or just slightly below the page. But it's kind of anywhere between the top and the bottom, or top and the top third. That's really where it should be. It varies slightly depending on people's makeup. But it's actually a great one, because it's a defense mechanism. So back in the day when we were kind of running and stuff like that, danger came from below. So we had to be very mindful of danger underneath, so we wouldn't trip and fall. So anyone who did, they didn't make it. And then other people got to the end, and then it serves us great when we now work on computers, as long as your screen is at the correct height.
Alrighty, so it seems like potentially people can't see the questions that are coming up. So just what I'm doing is I'm putting them into the chat function. So make sure that you're clicking in that when we have our prizes. And I'll make sure everyone's seen it when we get to our next one. So I've got a question for you, Greg, just obviously given everything that people are kind of coping with at the moment, anxiety levels seem to be rising. Do you have any tips for managing this anxiety, whether it's surrounding the pandemic itself or remote work?
Sure. Yeah, anxiety is definitely increased. If you kind of look at what anxiety is, anxiety at its kind of core is designed to, supposed to be a survival mechanism, and it's designed to try to assess threats that are coming at you, and then ideally address those. So kind of fear, worry, anxiety, they all have slightly different definitions, but they all kind of come at that idea of something bad will happen and I need to do something about that, or something bad is happening elsewhere. It's kind of potential consequences. Unfortunately, our mind can get kind of overzealous with that stuff, in trying to potentially protect us from the bad thing, whatever the bad thing is. And it starts kind of really running with that and getting stuck in it. The thing that I would always encourage people to be mindful of when it comes to anxiety is this whole idea of, if you try to completely get rid of any feeling of anxiety, the chances are you're probably going to increase the feeling of anxiety, because essentially your mind is telling you you're not safe for some reason. And if you then tell your mind, no, it's grand, don't worry about it, your mind will go, well, why are you saying that? This is not okay. I think I need to turn up the alarm even more. Why are you thinking that this is going to be okay? And so you sometimes get into this kind of this feedback loop. Not all the time. There are certainly times when we can kind of look at something and go, look, here's why this isn't a threat, and we can kind of do that. But if it's a case of there's stuff that's kind of literally beyond our control that we're still worrying about, I know our sometimes our automatic response is, well, don't worry about that thing. You can't control it, so stop thinking about it. But if I tell you not to think about something, it's exactly what you're going to think about. Like if I tell you, don't think about being on this Zoom call, you're going to think about being on the Zoom call. If I tell you, don't think about a plane flying in the sky, you're going to think about a plane flying in the sky, because that's the way we're wired. And so with anxiety, one of the key things around that is to recognize what's this for? What's my mind trying to kind of to tell me? Or how is it in a way trying to keep me safe? And it may be going overboard. And so kind of key things around that is to actually, again, coming back to that compassion piece, having a bit of compassion for yourself and saying, like, you know, I am scared, I am worried, I am anxious about these things. And that doesn't make me bad. It doesn't make the thing automatically happen. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen either. But actually just kind of engaging with that, and then kind of coming back to, like I mentioned before, the kind of the present moment. Okay, so I'm not ignoring it. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm not saying it is true, but what do I do right now? What do I choose in this moment while having that experience? Because sometimes what you'll find with anxiety is the harder we run away from it, the harder we try to attack it or get rid of it, the bigger it gets. And then it's almost like, even if we can get rid of this one particular thing we're worried about, then our mind potentially goes, okay, fine. Have you considered this other thing though? And then it just kind of, it goes from there.
Hmm. Great. Okay, so one for you, Brian. I'm sure you have to see plenty of clients coming in where they've either been working remotely from their couch or their bed or their kitchen table. But the reality obviously is, for some of us, we might not have the space for a proper home office setup. So if someone is confined with the space they have in their home, is there anything they can do ergonomically to kind of make a difference to their work setup?
Yes, space is all about trying to maximize what you have. So one of the biggest differences between working at home versus working in the office is, in the office, everyone wants big desks and 2 screens and big keyboards, and that's what everyone wants. And then when we go home, everyone's like, oh, no, small desks, small keyboards, small everything. So everything kind of shrinks. But the problem is that there is a kind of a minimum that we have to get. But one of the things that has never been that kind of overly popular just on this side of the water is something like a keyboard tray. So you can take kind of a half table with a keyboard tray that then extends into a full table, and you can use something like that really, really effectively in a space to maximize. So it's not going to take up all the space that you need. It just takes up the space that you basically harbor at the time. Short keyboards work very well as well. And then also using a laptop stand instead of a big monitor. So obviously everyone loves big monitors, but if you can't use one, then a laptop stand will actually work really, really well as well. So it's about maximizing the space that you have available to you, and then actually kind of putting the processes in place. But the one thing that people do is that they think they can do nothing. All right. That's not true. So people come to me and say, Brian, I'm working in a 1-bedroom. I can't swing a cat, you know, like that. And we see it all the time. I've seen people work in their dishwasher, like they've taken out their dishwasher and worked there where their dishwasher used to be. We've seen all kinds of things. But one thing is that you have to understand that your work rhythm and your work pattern has to change. So if you would normally be sitting for an hour and work straight through and then getting up, which is a pretty good practical way of doing it. If you then don't have an ideal setup and you're sitting on a bed, or you're sitting in a space that really is not suitable, then you have to change that break pattern, meaning you have to at least change your posture every 10-15 minutes. And that means you have to get up and move, and you have to kind of be rigid about that a little bit and conscious, because what people do is they let the pressures build in the body and then they try and get rid of them. It's the other way around. You don't want to let them build. And I hear this all the time where it's, oh, but I just, I'll go for a run in the evening and it helps me, or I exercise. And yes, exercise, brilliant, absolutely so important. But you will never be able to do enough exercise to counteract the effects of a kind of bad workspace. It'll get you eventually. That's just how it works. So as a result, it's very much about just being a little bit creative about things and kind of thinking, right, there's always something I can do here, and then just trying to adapt to it as best we can while we're in this current predicament. So, and I know we've been here for a while. But yeah.
Yes. All right. So will we try for another shot at this prize? I think I figured out the issue, and it was me. So I'm going to put up the question now to the group, and let me know if you can see it. So this next prize question is for a company ergonomic assessment with Spectrum Optimise. So the question is, what percentage of your body weight do your arms comprise of? And we'll be looking for you to answer this one, Brian. We'll just give a few minutes for the answers to come in. So for the time being, we have a question that's come in from Albert that I think actually maybe both yourself, Brian, and Greg, you can answer. What is the biggest problem you see about working from home? Is it physical or mental? And if there were 3 things you could do to prevent either, what would they be?
Yeah, if you want to start, Greg, you're more than welcome with that one.
Yeah, I think one of the key things about working from home in this context especially is the kind of sense of kind of connection or lack thereof to others. This is a kind of, it's something that's very much current, because what Brian was talking about earlier is essentially the kind of the hybrid model of, you know, people working from home and working in the office. And so the kind of one of the biggest things we're seeing at the moment is a sense of lack of connection or loneliness, and that's kind of one of the biggest challenges. That will potentially and ideally most likely start to kind of wane a little bit when we're able to go back into a kind of a hybrid model where we're not at home on our own all the time, or with the same group of people all the time potentially. The other piece is the work-life balance. Like that's always, I mean, that's hard at the best of times, even when you're not working from home. But when you are working from home, it kind of then becomes, well, I don't know if I work from home or I now just live in work. And knowing how much that comes up, that to me would kind of be one of the key pieces, and one of the things that's challenging about home working in general, not just now.
Great.
Yeah. So from an ergonomics point of view, it's kind of something similar, where space is definitely an issue. And I mean that in terms of the availability of space, just in terms of the actual physical space that you have available to you, but also the feeling of owning a certain space. That certainly plays on people, because oftentimes a work office is an extension of ourselves. You know, it's something that we often personalize and we use and that kind of stuff. And that actually plays a really big part. So like they do kind of look at metrics like that for people using like pictures on their desks and things like that. And that's something that does lack in the regular office, or in the home office. Space is definitely one. The other one is, what I would say, is equipment. So people definitely choose equipment for different reasons at home versus in the office. So in the office, you'll take everything that's going. All right, you will. Anything that's going, you'll want it and you'll use it and it'll be great. While in the home, you kind of look and you go, oh no, I don't want that in my house, or I don't have space for that, or I kind of would rather have something else. So as a result, then people will, what I'll say, make exceptions, and they'll start to, borrow a phrase, but they'll start to cut corners. And then when they start to do that, the problem then is that something's going to give. So when I asked my question there about the weight of the arms, your arms are really heavy. Okay, they're a lot heavier than we think. Okay,
Don't give the answer
I
away.
won't give the answer. I won't, but I'll say some of you way off. Okay, but anyway, but what I mean by that is that your arms actually need support during a workday. That's what they need. So if you don't have the right support structure for your arms, you don't have the right support structure for your legs, you don't have the right support structure for your back, all of a sudden then you'll start to make exceptions, and then it'll start to manifest itself in a physical manner, and then it starts to become a problem. So if you then work at home and you associate that home workspace with kind of pain and discomfort, then all of a sudden it starts to create all that negativity around it as well, and throw in extra anxieties, children, throw all that into it as well. But it's like, purely from a physical point of view, I would say the biggest challenge that people face when it comes to that is actually body fatigue. We actually overwork our bodies and ask them to do too much during the workday, rather than kind of giving them the regular support and breaks and all that they need to recover. And that's what I would say around that. Yeah. So remember, desks and all that, they're designed a certain way. They're designed like that on purpose. So it's really important. Yeah.
All right, well, Brian, will we put them out of their misery and answer this question of the weight of arms? We've got some very specific answers. 5.3 seems to be quite popular. What do your arms weigh? What percent of your body weight?
Yeah, so again, everyone's going to come at me with their own answers on this one, but you know, we look at things from a based on the person who's, you know, certain dimensions and certain all those sorts of things. So there's variations, but roughly speaking, they're about 8% of your body weight. That's what they are. So 8% of us. And when you think about 8% and the influence that they can have on, particularly into your neck and into your shoulders, it's quite a big deal. But I have had certain people who are very proud, tell me that their arms are much heavier. So, you know, there's different reasons for that. It depends how much you do, but on average, it's about 8%.
Perfect. We had an 8.5. That's the winner. So I'm going to be messaging you right now. Seems close enough. All right. I'm just conscious time is obviously going very quickly. We've had a number of questions come in on homeschooling and working from home. Do you mind maybe giving some tips on that, Greg? I think that's might be a good one for you to answer.
Yeah, I think that so whenever I talk about any of these things, again, kind of thinking about kind of context, because what works for one person is not necessarily going to work for someone else, and so there's never a kind of a one size fits all, be it with anxiety or anything else. So in this case, the ideas that I would encourage people to recognize is that, again, that sense of compassion and flexibility is going to be really important. Parents by their very nature will often put an awful lot of pressure on themselves to perform at a very specific level, and they'll kind of worry, you know, I'm not doing enough for my kid is not doing well, I should be doing this, I should be doing that, and it's almost like their mind starts beating themselves up about it. And it comes from a very, very human, very understandable place, because of course, I mean, these are small humans that you're responsible for, and it can be quite overwhelming when circumstances get in the way of them engaging in ways that are kind of most helpful for them. And then it's just things like general fatigue, like trying to come up with stuff for them to do, and it's while trying to work at the same time. So suddenly it's kind of, why did they draw on the walls with the crayons? They know they're not supposed to draw on the walls with the crayons, and they did anyway. And trying to kind of navigate that can get incredibly difficult. And so there is no kind of one kind of specific answer that I can give in turn that'll be kind of applicable for all situations. What I would say is that piece of compassion is really important. It's really important to kind of recognize that this is an unprecedented, incredibly difficult time. People who do homeschooling as a kind of a choice, they're set up and they have kind of additional supports, and those additional supports don't necessarily exist for a lot of people right now, and it's important to kind of to recognize that. In terms of kind of practicalities, it's essentially working out the concept of kind of good enough, like what's good enough right now. And trying to kind of work towards that. If you have other people in the home, if you can try to kind of distribute the some of the load as well, and if at all possible, have some kind of routine, but don't be a slave to the routine as well. So try to have a kind of a general set kind of time when, okay, this is quiet time, this is time that we're working on this, that, or the other, and then try to kind of construct a kind of a context around that where you try to keep engaged with that as much as you can. But also, if it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done, and this will pass. Of course, people are concerned about their kids and, you know, falling behind and all those kinds of things. And those are completely valid concerns. And the thing that I always encourage people to do is what can you do right now? Not what's perfect and what should you be able to do or any of those kinds of things, but what's actually doable right now. And if there are kind of concerns around kind of how you're managing that, or you know, you yourself or your child, especially if there's any kind of, you know, worries around kind of psychological well-being or those kinds of things, because this has been hard. Again, kind of having that sense of, okay, so what can we do to support, and it's not that everything has to be perfect and everyone has to be wonderful all the time, but are there things that we can do? Are there people that we can reach out to in our support system so that we don't have to do it all on our own? And potentially then even down to, are there other professionals that we might be able to speak to about some of this stuff, or just even consult with, hey, what do you think about this, or should I be concerned about this, or those kinds of things? Because there's not an awful lot of extra input right now. We don't have that many other things to think about. The things that we have to think about are the things that are in our homes, and the things that are in our homes are our kids and our work, and our family. And those are the things that are coming at us. So we are going to just focus and laser focus on that stuff. And so it's important to kind of recognize that context as you kind of consider any of this kind of stuff. And if it feels like you need additional help, start kind of considering, what might that look like? Would that look like, talking to an EAP, talking to the employee assistance program, if you have access to one, talking to a GP, talking to your friends, family, looking at those kinds of supports. It's about flexibility and doing what works.
And then what too, I know you mentioned obviously the importance of scheduled breaks, but what if people are giving up their lunch hours to get some time, getting homeschooling in? How do you kind of manage still getting your downtime as well, which is obviously so important?
Right. And yeah, the metaphor that psychologists always use when we're talking about mental health, but especially around parents, is when you're on a plane and the oxygen masks drop, which oxygen mask are you supposed to go for first? You're supposed to go for your own, because if you don't get yours on, you can't help anyone else. It's much easier said than done. I recognize that a lot of the stuff I'm saying here is, oh, that's a great theory, but how the hell do I do that? The thing that I would go back is, you need to have space for yourself as well. And so that means that sometimes very difficult decisions have to be made about what gets done and what doesn't get done. And so anyone can redline themselves for a little bit, but if it's kind of, that's it and that's all I'm doing, I would just encourage, if at all possible, and again, I'm always hesitant to speak in any kind of generalization because everyone's situation is different. If at all possible, looking at, are you actually trying to engage with yourself as well? And what are you willing to kind of pull back from, or what essentially can you force to pull back from, even as uncomfortable as that may be, in service of keeping the wheels on the road as much as you can.
And someone actually did put up a good point in our Q&A there. They're saying the biggest obstacle to work-life balance is the ability to say no, which you're basically kind of saying there as well, Greg.
Absolutely.
Okay, so really quickly, obviously, I have a few more questions I'd love to ask, but just conscious of time. So we're going to be doing a bonus prize, seeing as the first one that didn't work. So I'm putting it up in the chat now. And this one again is for you, Brian. It's, how much of your body weight do your legs comprise of? So we'll give a few minutes, just let me know if you can see that question coming in. Give a few minutes for those answers. Any questions that anyone would like to ask either Greg or Brian? We've got a few minutes still left. Let me have a quick scan through the Q&A. I know loads of things have come in. Someone's asking here, do you foresee an increase in personal injury insurance claims made by employees against their employers due to issues arising from working at home? Brian, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this one, my brother's a solicitor, okay, and he said something very funny to me not so long ago, where he said that the people that are going to sort out COVID are going to be the solicitors. So that's what he said, right? So he said, like, the true impact of COVID is coming when someone sues for it and all that type of stuff. But in their workspace, I think people do recognize that we're doing the best we can, if that makes sense. And most companies really are. They are trying, and a lot of us, I've noticed that, sometimes it takes a little bit of while to get things in place, but overall I don't think there will be a huge increase, if that makes sense, especially with kind of the new guidelines and stuff coming out. But it really is something that we will see in the next couple of years, in my opinion, where it's going to start to emerge, where the truer impacts of it really do start to come out, because there has been an increase in issues developing for people, but proving liability then is always the piece. So hence the solicitors. But yeah, so I think the true effects we'll see down the line, but again, it's going to be very difficult.
All right, so I think we've actually had, I believe, a correct answer for how much of your body weight legs make up. Do you want to share with us, Brian, what that is?
It's roughly speaking about 40%. It's 40% of your body, and because when you think about the legs just as a mass, there's a lot of bone, there's a lot of muscle. They're really dense, so therefore their weight is actually quite a lot. So as a result, they're about 40% of us, and they play a huge role in an awful lot of low back pain and an awful lot of problems in people's mid back as well. So if you're one of those people who have that kind of crackly back that you're always trying to stretch out, an awful lot of a great little trick is actually support the feet. Actually put something in underneath your feet and actually take them off the ground. So if you're the person who crosses their legs and has that crackly back, uncross the legs, support the feet, and it's a great one.
Perfect. So it looks like we have Avril who's won that prize. It's going to be a one-on-one ergonomic assessment with Spectrum Optimise. So you'll hear plenty more tips from Brian on your setup. So we just have 5 more minutes left. If anyone has any questions, please, again, feel free to put them up in the Q&A or the chat. But if not, I have one last one for you, Brian, and it might be a bit of a selfish question, but neck pain. My neck's been, I don't know if people have seen me, not so subtly probably adjusting my neck in this webinar, but what are your tips for managing neck pain?
Yeah, so the neck is definitely something that comes up quite regularly, and this is actually something I've spoken to Greg about. How do you tell the difference between anxiety neck pain versus structural and neck pain? So one of the things that I do for people is that we basically just check it. Okay, so if you feel that classical tops of the shoulders neck pain, that one that's kind of really tight either side, and you always want to stretch your neck all the time, then what you do is you think, right, my arms, are they playing a part in this? Because like I said, weight of the arms is quite significant. So for me, for anyone out there, if you're sitting at your desk, just place your 2 hands on your desk and just very gently just turn your head to the left and turn your head to the right. If you feel a restriction in your neck while you're sitting in your normal working position, that means your normal working position may not be correct. So as a way of kind of understanding that, you take your 2 shoulders and you shrug them up slightly. So bringing them up a little bit, so like they're not fully down, and then bringing your head left and right and seeing if that actually has any difference, if that's better or worse. So again, it's not important. It doesn't have to be better or worse, but if it is, and then try the opposite, pull your shoulders down for me. You know, that classical granny used to get you to pull your shoulders down position, and then try left or right and to see if there's any difference. So if there is a distinction between the first one, which is what we say your normal position, slightly up or pulled down, if there's a difference, that is actually the height of your desk that you should be sitting at, or height of your chair that you should be sitting at. So if you're sitting too low in your chair and you have to push your shoulders up and work like this all day, and that's an aggravator for you, that can be something as simple as that. Or if you're sitting too high and your arms are dragging, then that can also be another one. So I always believe, test your neck, ask your neck. It actually tells an awful lot of truth, and it's a great one to try. And then if there's absolutely nothing there and that's all fine and you still have neck pain, then I would say it's definitely Greg. You have to speak to you about that then.
Perfect. Okay.
You kept the top tip until the end, Brian.
No.
You got to finish strong, I'm afraid.
Okay, so before we wrap up, congratulations obviously to Colette and Avril who won our 2 prizes. For those of you who didn't, we have another shot to win our grand prize, which is a home office pack. So all you need to do is you need to tag Codex, Spectrum Optimise, and Spectrum Mental Health on a social media post for a chance to win. So you'll have until this evening at 12 p.m. midnight, and we'll be announcing the winners tomorrow. So if there's no other questions, obviously feel free. You can reach out to me if you have anything that you would have loved to ask today but didn't get a chance. I'll put my email up in the chat and I'll send on the recording obviously to all of you attendees. But feel free to let me know if you have any additional questions. And a big thank you to obviously the both of you, Brian and Greg, for joining us today. I know I'm taking a lot away from this call, so thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye now.